So, looking at resistance training for youth, we do want to sort of dispel some of the myths early on associated with resistance training. So we're going to do that today as well. But we're going to get into the main resistance section. So we will get into sort of some of the main body parts, right? How do you train? Like until now, we've sort of talked about training concepts, like how do we improve our core in general? How do we improve our balance or our reactivity, speed, agility, quickness? How do we sort of work on posture through like over and underactive muscles? All of that is sort of like, it's almost like the meta workout, right? It's sort of all the stuff beyond like, or not meta workout, but like part of the meta approach to like athleticism, you know? But today we are going to get into like, well, what if I want to make my shoulders bigger? What if I want to like train my chest? What if I want to, you know, get better at pull-ups in my upper back, or, you know, get better at barbell squats or deadlifts? Or what if I want to get into powerlifting? That's the sort of the main resistance section. When we start training like body parts, we're talking about the resistance section. So youth resistance training, a lot of times like people think it's like, oh, well, you can't have kids work out, you know. And it sometimes is thought to be very dangerous or very controversial. We'll sort of like dispel those myths today and talk about like the proper way to, you know, implement this stuff safely and effectively, and how it does actually improve like the strength in our youths, which carries over into adulthood and has basically no not basically, it has no drawbacks. And I guess the only drawback you can think of is like strength training a kid is that you are burdening them for the rest of their life with the need to have a gym membership. You know, like we're making, you know, little gym addicts at a young age. But I don't really see that as a detriment. So objectives today, we want to understand youth resistance training and how we use it, dispel any myths that are associated with it, understand the general guidelines for implementing resistance training, and then we'll talk about how to like actually design those programs. So first off, I do want to kind of, like I said, dispel some of these myths. The idea that like resistance training is bad for youths, or the idea that it can affect growth, it will stunt your growth. That's like a really big one that you hear all the time. So like myth number one, the big one that we always hear is like injuries are very common amongst youths, right? It's like, oh, well, if you train like a kid, they're going to get injured more, right? Because their joints are not necessarily ready to be able to do that, right? I think it was a 10-year-old. I think it was like 10-year-old sets weightlifting. I think I just saw this like literally the other day. Was it a 9-year-old? No, that's from like 2 years ago. I feel like it was in the news, but there was like yeah, we'll just watch one of these. But like, you know, there was like a young kid who was like,
what's up, guys? This is JD with Jack.
Like specific like powerlifting, or I'm not even powerlifting, but Olympic weightlifting, right? So here is like a young kid, right? 9-year-old kid is doing a barbell squat, right? And it seems a little odd, you know. You're like, oh man, what does a 9-year-old kid need with a barbell squat or a deadlift, right? And he looks great. You know, it's like, again, it kind of comes down to learning how to like recruit these muscles like very specifically, right? And that's something that's good. Like his squat form looks really good. He's working like some maximal effort. Now, here's what I'll say. He is doing some very heavy strength training here. Like he's doing very low rep, heavy training. Do I think that that's going to result in an injury? No, not necessarily. The one thing that I'll say about it is it's not really capitalizing on his strengths. It's kind of playing to his weaknesses. Like as a youth, we don't really have the physiology in place to be very good at anaerobic training. And he's very much training anaerobically here. So I'm like, I don't know if I would necessarily like focus on like heavy lifting, but I'm not. The reason I wouldn't do it is very different than I think he's going to get injured, or I think it was going to halt his physical development. I definitely don't think that. There's no evidence to suggest that's true. I mean, we've looked at it. We've sort of like goofed around with the data. We've tried to observe. It's like, you know, honestly, guys, like when it comes to like injuries in youth, it's the same as an adult. As long as something is like executed with proper form, and executed safely and correctly, there's really no more risk when training youths than there is when compared with training adults, you know? And on the flip side, like I'm going to say this next mod, you know, we'll see like seniors set like amazing weightlifting records as well. Whereas like here's a 73-year-old, you know, power lifter, right? On completely the flip side. We'll hear that all the time too. And it's like, oh, you're much more likely to get injured as like a senior. And it's like, again, that's not necessarily true as long as you are, you know, I guess 73. That's, you know, looks good for 73. You know, as long as you are following the same guidelines that we would always do with a regular client, right? Making sure that they're executing a movement like properly with good form and stuff. There's no evidence to suggest that it's any riskier with any population. Like, I think it's one of those things where like, I think it's kind of an example of how we we tend to believe in magic a little bit sometimes. I know it sounds kind of weird, but like what I mean is like a lot we tend to kind of believe that there's sort of like something at play behind the exercise. At the end of the day, every weightlifting movement is, you know, it's not magic. It just puts stress on the body in a specific way. If you do too much stress on the body, yeah, it's going to cause an injury. You know, if you let your knees cave in while you squat, like your adductors are going to, you know, turn your knees, your tibia, and it's all going to rotate. You're getting too much stress in certain parts of things, right? But that's not necessarily what's always going to happen, right? Like as long as you do it properly with good form, you know, there's no reason like doing a barbell squat is special when compared to like doing any other physical type of activity. You know, if we really were worried about somebody getting injured simply because of like physical activity, we wouldn't let them hike or, you know, run or do anything, you know? So I definitely don't see any connection there. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that weightlifting is more dangerous for youths. The one thing is that kids have a really short attention span. So we do need to be aware of that, which could make which could make improper coaching more common. You know, I mean, we saw that 9-year-old in the video there. He had a really good form. He was doing things like exactly as he needed to. I would probably avoid super heavy lifting with a 9-year-old if it was me coaching, because I'm not exactly an expert on coaching 9-year-olds. But like, as long as like, you know, I was able to get them to do form like that kid did, then great. Like he's injury proof, you know, like he's going to be safe and not working too hard. The other myth is that it will halt physical development. It'll sort of stunt your growth. This idea that like, oh, your muscles are going to grow and they're going to pull too hard on your joints and it's going to stop your bones from growing or something like that. There's literally, I don't think you can find a single piece of evidence anywhere on the entirety of the internet, which is so big. Everything's on the internet. I don't think you could find one piece of evidence to show truth to that. You know, there's absolutely zero evidence suggesting that like weightlifting slows down growth. If anything, it would actually increase growth, right? It would actually like, you know, increase bone density and things like that. Now, I will say if you are overtraining a youth, just like any other, like again, just like any other client, if you overtrain a client, they're not going to repair very quickly. That could technically temporarily like slow down their like development, because if we consider development to be things like muscle growth or bone density or things like that, you got to remember that like weightlifting or just exercise in general is damage, right? Like when you are doing an exercise, you're going to experience a little bit of cellular damage. If you are creating more damage than you are repairing, you're at a net loss, right? So we could consider that stunted growth kind of, but to say that like it's going to rewrite your DNA and get your genes to express differently it definitely doesn't make any sense. The only way that I would even like somewhat consider that is like if you consistently overtrained like your entire life and then like passed on your genes to the next generation, maybe there's some epigenetic stuff at play there, but epigenetics is like incredibly complicated and way over my head. So I could maybe understand that a little bit based on my limited understanding of like what genes will get expressed in the next generation, but it certainly is not going to have a stunted growth for like our generation. My mom as a kid, or my mom as a kid, my mom when I was a kid, so my mom had this like, I'm sure you guys do this. We have a cup of coffee and you get engrossed in work, you leave that coffee laying around and like, cools down. It becomes like ice cold, like just like sitting at room temperature. My mom would always have like, I think 2 coffees sitting around the house because she would always like, oh, it's cold, and she would leave it there and like, I'll come back to that later or whatever. And she always put like lots of like cream and sugar in her coffee. And when I was a kid, I loved it. I loved my mom's coffee. It's very weird, but she was so worried that it was going to like stunt my growth. She was like, because that's what she'd been told. She was like, coffee stunts the growth of kids. Now here's the thing: you probably shouldn't give kids caffeine because they will annoy the heck out of you for the rest of the day. Also, it can actually cause your heart to speed up, and the heart's already like racing very quickly as like a youth because again, smaller heart. So it's not really like suggested to give youths like large amounts of caffeine. Also, they could maybe even build a tolerance up to caffeine, which then like all of a sudden, if they don't get it one day, they could get like headaches and be very moody. There's some negative effects, but like to say that it's going to stunt someone's growth is not based in any version of biology or science. But my mom was like afraid of that. I remember like going to like a pediatrician appointment with my mom, and she like brought that up, and I was like, I'm there, I'm like listening. And the doctor was like, I don't know, switch to tea. And like, as an adult now, I wish I could go back in time and like look in on that conversation, because I imagine like the doctor was just saying whatever just to kind of move on, because he probably knew, like, nah, it's not gonna have any effect, but if you're worried about it, like switch to tea, like. And so my mom like switched to tea at a young age, or when I was at a young age, while I was at a young age, and didn't come back to coffee for years. And I remember like, when I was studying biology, like somehow this conversation, I was like, mom, like none of that was true, right? Like you could probably, I was like, you could have switched back to coffee years ago. And she was like, well, this is just one of those things, So the idea that it's going to halt physical development, anything's going to stunt growth. Stunting growth is for the most part kind of a myth. Now, I'm not saying that you can't stunt growth. You can't if you overtrain and like don't get enough food, don't get enough rest. Those things can stunt growth, but in the same way that we do that with adults. There's a really interesting study if you guys ever want to read about it. It was like the effects of sleep on muscle growth. The relationship between muscle sleep and muscle strength. Yeah, in Chinese university students. So this is a pretty fascinating stuff. You guys Google what I Googled and click the first NCBI link, which always has really great research articles. This is a really fascinating study. What they did was they allowed they took like 2 groups of people, and they put them through like a weightlifting routine, tracked their progress in terms of like muscle growth and fat loss and all the things that you're going to track. And they allowed one group, they got one group to get 8 hours of sleep consistently every single night. They gave the other group only 6 hours of sleep every single night, but they were allowed to take a nap and catch up on as much sleep as they wanted on the weekend, even though they still only took like 6 hours nightly. And after a couple of weeks, the 6-hour group felt perfectly normal. They all got used to a 6-hour sleep schedule. And I'm sure you guys are listening. I mean, most people who are listening right now, you're probably like, yeah, I don't get 8 hours very often, and I feel fine. And what's very interesting is like your brain will kind of eventually trick you into thinking, yeah, you feel fine. But if you get that consistent 8 hours, you'll probably likely feel much better. But what they did is they actually put them on like a fat loss routine, like a reduction in calories. And they saw that both groups lost a very similar amount of weight. So you might be thinking, oh, that's great, right? Like, I can sleep 6 hours and still get the same results. remember what I said was they lost this about the same amount of weight. But group A, who is getting like adequate sleep, most of the weight loss was fat loss, and the other group, it was sort of a much higher percentage of muscle loss, but also some fat loss for sure. But it was like crazy substantial, the data. I think honestly, I think it was like a 75% difference. That's huge. And that just goes to show like how important it is to rest. Muscle is not built in the gym. Muscle is broken in the gym. It's built in the kitchen and in your bed. Like that's where we develop muscle. So if we were talking about the idea of like halting physical development, yeah, if we've got a youth who's not getting enough sleep, who's overtraining, sure, I think that could happen. But I think to say that like weightlifting is magical and causes, stunted growth or like more common injuries because there's just something special about those movements, I don't think there's any scientific evidence to suggest that that's true. So that's the youth stuff for the day. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but let's get into the how to do it, right? Let's talk about this. So what are some of the benefits of resistance training? And this is true for any clients, not just youths. Well, it improves our motor skills, teaches us how to use our shoulders, legs, arms, whatever. It improves body composition. It's a very good way to burn fat and build muscle, and it increases our bone mineral density. So if you go back to our biology class, when we talked about those osteoclasts and osteoblasts, right? When we look at like the idea that, your osteoclasts, they break down imperfect bone tissue, and then your osteoblasts come along and build up any of the damage that, like, they lay back down and create denser bone where your osteoclast ate it away, right? So if you fracture a little bit of your bone, and when I say fracture, I mean a micro fracture, right? Like microscopic, you're not breaking a bone here, but you're creating a little bit of cellular damage. Your osteoclast is going to come along and eat away that cellular damage, take the ingredients from it, take the pieces from it, and release it. And then your osteoblasts are going to lay it back down and make it stronger and more resistant to damage in the future. Now, I don't know very much about welding, but I have talked to my friends. I have talked to friends who are welders, and they'll tell you kind of an interesting fact about welding. A welded piece of metal that is properly welded, like well done, is actually stronger than just a straight bar of metal. Like if you were to take like a bar and break it in half and then weld it back together and like seal it, that's actually going to be stronger and more resistant to damage than the initial bar was, weirdly enough, if it's done properly. And it's because you lay like a strip down and it reinforces it, right? That's what strength training does to our bones. When we lift heavy weights, our bones bend and they twist and they experience these little tiny microscopic fractures. And those microscopic fractures are then repaired, but rather than being repaired back to exactly the same state they were at, they're repaired and they become a little bit stronger and more resistant to damage in the future. And that way we can continually progress through things, right? So we know there's an increased bone density associated with weight-bearing exercise, and that's any exercise that works against gravity as a resistance, right? So lifting weights is a great example. Running is a good example. I will say, I love resistance bands. I love swimming for fitness. I think these things are very good. They don't have quite the same benefit in terms of bone density. Those are not considered weight bearing. They're very good for burning calories. They're very good for improving athleticism. I love those types of exercise. But if you have a client who in particular you're focused on the bone density stuff, you're probably going to want to go to gravity-based exercise. If I had a client with osteoporosis, rather than put them on like a recumbent bike, I'm going to put them on like a treadmill walking. I'll make sure there's hand supports, and then rather than doing like resistance bands, I'll probably focus on dumbbells, just because like the priority there is bone density. If the priority is something else, great. I'm not saying like resistance bands, running or swimming, I'm not saying stuff like that isn't good or valuable. I'm just saying, like, if we're talking about bone density in particular, weight bearing has been shown to be the most effective. So we're getting a ton of benefits here. And then on the outside of just like physical benefits, we also have like, increased like psychological benefits, right? We know that like weightlifting is a really good way to create endorphins and, improve our mood and reduce the negative psychological effects of like depression and things like that. It promotes a healthy sort of psychosocial well-being. It's a really good place to get to know people and all kinds of benefits. Or, if we're not even talking about just resistance training, just talk about like playing sports, right? It lowers the risk of cardiovascular disease because it is also a very good way to keep the heart and lungs healthy. A lot of times we can sort of implement some cardio with our strength training. I was doing that for my girlfriend last night. We were I was doing a little kettlebell routine with her. And like, she was like, I feel really great afterwards. And I was like, yeah, well, that's kind of the benefit of putting your cardio with your strength training, may not necessarily be the best way to build massive amounts of muscle, but it's a good way to build strength and your cardiorespiratory system. So we're a fan. And it develops a resistance to injuries. Again, if we know that we are lifting in specific ways and we learn how to do these things the right way, we are going to sort of reduce our risk of injury if we do those movements in our everyday life. So hopefully that sold you guys on the idea of resistance training for youths and also just adults in general. I mean, I don't think anybody in here doesn't believe in the benefits of exercise. I don't think we'd be in the PFT program if that were the case. But looking at our general guidelines here, ideally, we want to perform strength training in some capacity about 2 to 3 times per week with maybe like a day of rest between each session, right? So as long as you are implementing a little bit of strength training and adequate recovery, that's what's going to be important in terms of implementing like a strength and a cardio routine, right? So 2 to 3 days per week is going to be what's recommended. If we lay that out on a classic, like, week-long schedule, my favorite is going to be like Monday, Wednesday, Friday with maybe a little bit of cardio in between, or maybe sports on the weekends or something like that. That's going to be a really good schedule for youth. It's going to be a really good schedule for adults, honestly. Me personally, I do about 4 days of strength training per week, but I always make sure that I'm hitting sort of half of my muscle groups on one day and then the other half the next day, a little bit of rest and then repeat. And that way, like if I did like, let's say upper body on Monday, I would have Tuesday, Wednesday to rest. I'd be back to my upper body on Thursday. That's going to work really well. With youth, because we can't really capitalize, like, that makes sense for an adult who wants to train very anaerobically and lift very heavy, but with a youth who isn't training very anaerobically, they're training more aerobically, we can sort of bunch that up a little bit more. We can start combining some exercises as well, right? We can get a little bit of upper body work, we can get a little lower body work, and maybe we can get some core in there simultaneously. So when it comes down to it, and it comes down to the program design, we're going to primarily focus on corrective or functional flexibility, which means like looking at our flexibility template, we really are kind of primarily focusing on phases like 1 and 5, corrective and functional. We're not really going to capitalize too much on active flexibility simply because like our youths aren't going to be able to contract hard enough without that anaerobic training ability to really benefit from active isolated stretches. So if they're like a late stage teen, like you get into like 16, 17, 18, yeah, maybe you can start implementing that and start training them a little bit more like an adult. But if it's like a younger youth, if you're doing like an after school training program for like younger audiences, you're probably going to spend your time focused on stabilization and power, corrective and functional flexibility in the OPT. So our general guidelines for resistance training, is generally focused on phases 1, 2, and 5. So we will sort of dip our toes into, let me see the resistance section here. We will sort of dip our toes into the strength level for sure, but we're going to primarily focus on this phase 2 here. We're not really going to train for hypertrophy. because muscle growth is pretty rare in youths until puberty. And then we're probably not gonna focus too much on maximum strength, simply because like they're also not going to get the same hormonal benefits there. So I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying it's not safe to train in phase 3 or phase 4 with a youth, right? I'm saying like it's probably just not going to be as effective. So why would we put a lot of effort training in something that we're going to get a very minimal return on? It's like the stock market. You want to pick the stuff that you can invest low and sell high and get a really good return, right? This stuff, you're not getting a very good return on your investment. So we're going to focus primarily today on phases 1, 2, and 5. So Cyrus, this is the first time we are going to start talking a little bit about phases. Until now, we've kind of talked about like level 1, level 2, and level 3. But the phases, because there are so many different ways to kind of grow strength, you could get very much good endurance, or you could get good, muscle size, you can get good strength, like sort of true strength. We have 3 individual phases here within the OPT model, right? So for youths, we're going to capitalize on stabilization endurance as a phase, because that makes a lot of sense. It's high repetition. It's unstable exercises that are going to train our nervous system to get better at particular key movements. That makes a lot of sense with like a youth. We're going to do a lot of the explosive power stuff without doing a lot of the heavy lifting power stuff, where we focus on like plyometrics and things like that, because that's going to be very effective because it can be done very anaerobically. You can go through like a body weight jumping circuit, and yeah, you're going to burn a lot of calories. You're going to be very aerobic the whole time. And then in terms of strength, we with youths are going to focus on strength endurance, which is phase 2. It's the high repetition version of strength. So it's like strength movements, but performed in a very stabilization way. I always like to tell people that I consider strength endurance to be like phase 1.5, because you're kind of slowly moving out of the stabilization level before fully committing to strength. So when it comes to resistance training for like our youths, we're generally focused on those phases, and we're always progressing from our lower stages upwards, just like any other client. We don't want to necessarily jump ahead in the OPT. So general guidelines that are a little bit different than the numbers I want you guys to have memorized to pass your test. But general guidelines are just a little bit different for kids. We want to make sure that we're picking the appropriate resistance exercises related to their goals. That's the same for youths and adults. We're going to increase load by maybe 5 to 10% at a time. That's also pretty much the same for adults. Let's say your client gets a little bit, they're like, this is getting easy, great. Let's make it a little bit harder, increase the weight by maybe 5%, it doesn't have to be crazy. We are pretty much going to stay somewhere between 1 and 3 sets. Obviously with adults, we have a very wide range of sets, but this has been shown to be what's most effective with youths. And when it comes to developing our strength with youths, we're going to be somewhere between 6 and 15 reps. We don't really go any higher than 15 because, like, again, it's kind of an attention span thing. They get a little bit bored. And we don't really go anywhere below 6, because if we go below 6, we're really starting to get into like the heavy lifting, which they're not really going to benefit from. If they are going for power, we can keep the reps relatively low, but these are very explosive movements that are very much built around, like, you'd probably do that as like a circuit, and build up like that cardiorespiratory approach to explosive movements, right? So we're going to use dumbbells, we're going to use barbells, we can use plates, we can use machines, we can use resistance bands, we can use stability balls, ropes, sandbags. Bodyweight exercise is obviously going to be great. All of these things, the sort of traditional version versus the alternative version, all of them are great. You can implement any of them. I will say these traditional versions are definitely a little bit more weight bearing in nature. So again, if you're going for the benefits of like increased bone density, you're probably going to focus on the traditional stuff, lifting against gravity as a resistance. You want to go a little bit into the alternative realm. This is still gravity, body weight, sandbags, ropes, medicine balls. Those are also all very much body weight. So I'd say those are very good for bone density. Tubing, which is like the resistance bands, not against that for sure, but again, not exactly as good for bone density. But like all of these can be really good ways to implement exercise because they're easy to transport. They're great for small, like, group training. By the way, I had a student graduate. I'm gonna go ahead and pull him up actually. So I can find Jay Howard here. So this is a student who graduated just before the pandemic hit, and he has been working really diligently at doing like youth outdoor camps in the same place that we are going to come do ours. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually run into him if he's out there at some point. But he like comes to these soccer fields and like trains like youths in like a lot of like anaerobic stuff. So he does like a lot of soccer stuff. He does a lot of like sprinting stuff for kids who want to get better at like track and field, football, all that stuff. And he's just out there like doing really fun weightlifting stuff, running these successful boot camps. And it's great, man. It's good to see. It's fine. I see him whenever I play Ultimate. He's out there like training his clients and stuff. And, he's getting more and more equipment all the time. Where, he's working with resistance bands. Then also he's got a couple like, sandbags. And then suddenly he's got some dumbbells out there, a few more cones, a few ladders, all kinds of really good stuff. And so he sort of like crafted a whole business. I think last time I talked to him, he said he had like 70 clients or something. Crafted a whole business on stuff that he can just fit into the back of his car. That's pretty great. And he's like making a big difference in the world, working with kids and using the OPT model. So awesome stuff, right? So we are going to use the OPT model to progress and to regress. Like I said, we're going to primarily focus on phase 1, 2, and 5. Your stabilization level is going to be your, God dang it. Your stabilization level is going to be your starting point. So here's the thing about the stabilization level, right? The stabilization level is our foundation, and it is very similar to how we approach our balance training from yesterday, right? Like stabilization is built entirely around picking unstable versions of exercise. So if we consider like, let's say like the big, if we look at like the big 5 movements, right? What do you got in sort of, actually, hold on. Let's do it. We'll do it. If we're looking at like the big 5, what are they? We've got like the bench press, which is like everybody's favorite. We've got the barbell squat. We got the deadlift, probably the military press, and then like a bent over row. Right. So these are kind of our classic, these are kind of the classic movements that you see in the gym, right? The big key 5 movements that everybody's always talking about. And it's nice because it does very similarly match up with like, we've got a press, or I'm sorry, we got a push, we've got a squat, we've got a hinge, we've got a press, and we've got a row. And so those 5 kind of key movements that we tend to make. I would say if you want to make this just 1% more athletic, I would throw a vertical pull in there as well. So I'd probably get like some version of a pull-up in addition to the bent over row. But this is a really good basic routine here. The one thing to understand though is that these are all very stable movements. And if we're trying to teach these movements, squat, push, pull, hinge, press, row, if we're trying to teach those very key movements, we want to make sure that our nervous system is getting the type of information necessary to really like analyze that and learn how to stabilize our joints while we're doing a bench press, right? Like these things can be loaded up with a lot of weight. It's very important to make sure that we know how to move these actual particular movements properly. If we can't do that, we are likely to experience some type of injury. So instead of just looking at these or starting here, we're going to start in the stabilization phase. The stabilization phase is always going to be our starting point because it builds a foundation for learning key movements by training them in an unstable environment. So if I can teach you how to do an unstable version of a push or a row or a press or a squat or a hinge, right? If I can teach you an unstable version of that, you are certainly going to know how to do it properly under those heavy loads. So that's where the stabilization version of things comes in, right? So instead of looking at these movements here, which would be like strength movements, I'll go ahead and put that. What colors are they using? Purple and red. I'll put this one in purple here, right? Rather, like this is sort of our strength approach here. I love these movements, but you know, we are going to progress into this, right? This is going to be our level 2 exercises. These are traditional strength, right? So we'll just go ahead and put that here. Let's take a look at where we would start, though. We would start in the stabilization level. So I would do a stabilization version of a pushing movement, maybe something like a stability ball chest press, right? I didn't give myself enough room here. Hold on. Let's just move this whole thing over here slightly. So let's make that a stability ball chest press, right? Because now I can focus on lifting a little bit lighter, but I can get better at the movement, right? Rather than doing a barbell squat, let's try doing like a ball squat, something that's a little bit more unstable, or a Bosu ball squat would be a really good version. Instead of doing a deadlift, let's go with like a single leg deadlift, right? Or single leg RDL, Romanian deadlift. That's going to teach me the hinge properly. Rather than doing like a regular, like, you know, military press, let's do a single leg shoulder press. And rather than a bent over row, I can do a single leg dumbbell row. Right, so now I've got the same key movements, right? I've got my push, my squat, my hinge, my press, and my row, but I'm doing very unstable versions of those exercises, right? So this is very much going to be the stabilization approach, the level 1, right? So this is level 1, and this is stabilization, right? So that's where it's going to start, right? I'm going to move from here before I ever try to do the very heavy versions of all those exercises. I'm going to master doing light versions of them first. And so I move from level 1 into level 2, right? So that's kind of the thing that we're starting with, right? Our starting point starts in an unstable environment, right? You'll notice like I'm on a stability ball, right? So we got the stability ball chest press. This is a great exercise that's very good for building strength, and also very good at building stability. Is it as good at building strength as a bench press? No, because it's not necessarily a strength-based exercise. This guy's going very heavy, 100 pounds, right? So he's on the ball and it's very unstable. I mean, look at how many like little micro movements this guy is doing, right? All those little micro movements are all the little micro muscles that have to stabilize. He also, in order to like stay in this proper position here, his head's supported really well, by the way. He has to be in a nice straight line right here. He's not letting his hips sag at all. So he's also learning how to implement his core. His core is doing a lot of work while he's doing this movement, right? Now, is that the only chest stabilization exercise? No, we could do a medicine ball push-up. That's a really good one, right? So you put your hands on a medicine ball and like, see how like, no, go back. See all the wiggling, right? He goes down and wiggles a little bit, right? He has to stabilize. And then he can roll it over to the other side if he wants to and do like the other arm. That'd be a really good one. But what we're seeing here is that it's unstable. We could do like a TRX chest press, right? That's going to be a really good one as well. This is a very unstable version of things. I saw him sag his hips in the picture. I hope he doesn't do that. Yeah, right. And it's very, very, very unstable. So that's what we are sort of looking at here, right? See all those little wiggles? We are looking for stabilization versions of those. Let's look at a ball squat. That's an unstable version of a hinge. I'm sorry, of a squat. So he squats down. The ball wants to wiggle side to side. That's pretty good. Or you could do like a Bosu ball squat. That'd be a very unstable version, right? And two ways to do this. You can do it on the rounded edge or the flat top. You should do it on the flat top, which is a little bit harder, right? Or maybe you put both feet on a half foam roller side by side and it starts to wiggle a little bit. So she has to control her squat, right? She's saying like, don't let your knees cave in or buckle out. She has to control her squat with good form as she goes down under this unstable environment. So we need to have like a way to progress this, right? How do we progress our stabilization level exercises? If we're trying to create progression here, we are going to progress through instability, right? So when we make things harder in the stabilization level, we're going to progress them by making them more unstable, right? So as something starts to get more challenging, like let's say you're doing 3 sets of 12 repetitions with your client, right? That's the program you write. And they get really good at it and they come back into week, let's say it's like the 3rd week of training and they're like, you know what? I feel really good at the end of this 3rd set. I think it might be too easy. Let's make this a little bit harder. Now, how do you make stuff harder in stabilization? Well, we're going to progress through instability, right? We're going to progress, if it's a lower body exercise, we might go from like a 2-legged, very stable environment to maybe like a staggered stance environment, right? So rather than doing just like a very simple, these are all very unstable already. But let's say like, you had a client who was just doing like body weight squats, right? You might go into like a slightly staggered stance to make that a little bit harder and add some instability there. Or you might go into like a single leg version, or maybe you go into a 2-legged version where you make it harder by putting the surface unstable. Then you go into a staggered stance, unstable, and then you go into a single leg, unstable. So if we're looking at like progressing things, I would teach someone how to, and I'm trying to teach them those 5 key movements. I would start with a squat, and then eventually I can work my way to a lunge, which goes into a staggered stance. And now like there's some instability there, right? In a very stable environment. And then eventually they can go into like maybe like a single leg version of some type of squat, right? Like a single leg squat touchdown is a really great, single legged exercise here, right? Or even just a regular old single leg squat. So something that looks like this. That would actually probably be better for an actual squat. I think the single leg squat touchdown is more of a deadlift. You look at the angles, that's very much a hinge. But like that's sort of our progression, right? We go from, and then eventually we do that in an unstable environment. So then we go back to the 2 legs version, put them on a Bosu ball. Then we have them do maybe like or maybe instead of a Bosu ball, we put them on 2 half foam rollers, right? And then you put them on 1 half foam roller where they're staggering, learning how to do that lunge, which is still very much a squat motion. And then eventually like single leg squat while they're on like some unstable surface. So we make things harder by progressing it through instability. Stuff gets harder here because it is more unstable rather than just making it heavier. You ask 90% of people how they make stuff harder in the gym, they're going to say, make it heavier. That's not necessarily a wrong answer if your goal is to train for strength. But if it's to train for stabilization, I need to progress it by making it more unstable. And then there's also upper body progressions that sort of follow the same thing, right? If I did like a 2-arm version of something, that's where I start. And then eventually I can do like an alternating arm, because that's going to cause me to like, I have to make sure I stabilize instead of like lift it, moving my body around. And then eventually I just go to like a single arm, right? And then I can go with like a single arm with rotation. That is where you'll either do like a combo movement, right, with rotation, or a lot of times, like if it was a chest press, you would do like a chest press and then rotate and then come back down. There's not like a lot of rotation happening in like a shoulder version. And then we do the same thing in an unstable environment, right? 2 arms, unstable, alternating arms in an unstable environment, single arm in an unstable environment. Have you guys ever tried to do a single arm friggin' a single arm ball chest press? It is friggin' difficult. It is so freaking hard to be able to like stabilize while you're doing this, you know. But once you've got it, your core strength is going to be off the charts. And so it's a really great way to kind of get that. And then eventually, like I said, you can get that single arm with a little, let's see here, I'll pull that up as well, actually. Single arm chest press with rotation. So you'll see something kind of like this. Here's somebody doing it on a stability ball. I think he's coming up to his elbow. I don't think you have to do that, but yeah, there we go. That is really difficult without losing your balance, you know? Or you would probably much more likely do like a cable version of an exercise with a bit of rotation there. So the cable machine is also, this is a really good example of stabilization level exercises because the cable is so unstable while you're doing it. Love cable machines for my stabilization level clients. So does that make sense, guys? Just the three of you, but Cyrus, Chris, Julio, you guys have any questions on the stabilization level?
Oh, no, good. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's not just always that traditional stuff, you know. It's, you know, the stabilization level, that's our where we're going to pick. So you guys do have your books. I do have those checklists for you. Where is it? So if you look in your books, you'll notice if you go to the exercise sort of appendix where it's got all of those exercises listed, these are, I've sort of compiled those onto like one big list here, but you'll see the stabilization level side of things. We start like, you're going to always do corrective flexibility, right? So the only thing is, this is your tool bag, right? This list here is the stabilization tool bag. So we'll start with SMR, you know, and we do that with every, that is a tool that's in every tool bag. But then we got our static stretches. Then we've got our core stabilization stuff. So we're limiting the movement of the spine and focused on stability. We got the balance stabilization stuff. We're limiting the movement of our balance leg. We're focused on stability. We're limiting our movement upon landing in our plyometric or reactive stabilization exercises. And then we've got total body movements. We've got chest, back, shoulders. I haven't talked about it today, but we've got biceps, triceps. And legs, right? All of those movements as well. And we've got stabilization versions of them, right? So rather than a barbell squat, we've got a ball squat. Rather than a bench press, we've got a ball push up with your hands on the ball. You know, there's a million versions of all of our stabilization stuff. So these are the movements you want to get familiar with when you are trying to build a stabilization routine. So when it comes to your program design, we are going to focus on the stabilization level on resistance stabilization exercises. So when I say resistance stabilization, that's a placeholder for total body, chest, back, shoulders, biceps, triceps, and legs. Those are our 7 body parts that we're primarily focusing on. Now in here, I really just kind of put like 5 key, like the 5 big ones, you know, squat, push, pull, hinge, row. I did not do them in that order, and that's the order I always say them in. I don't know why I built this chart this way, but that's the general approach to those 5 key movements. There's biceps, triceps, and total body. Well, biceps and triceps are missing. There's 2 leg ones in here as well. So yeah, like we got to get a little bit of that. If we're looking at the NASM approach, right, they're going to do this just a little bit differently. So I'll put that down here. We're going to see, you know, total body stabilization exercises. We're going to see, oh, you know what? Hold on a second. See if I can hop over here. Can I just do that? Oh, close. We're going to see chest stabilization, back stabilization, shoulder stabilization, biceps stabilization, triceps stabilization, and lastly, they always put legs at the bottom for some reason, leg stabilization exercises, right? So that is our exercise selection here, right? We're going to sort of, make sure that this is where we're putting all this stuff. So that's how we're choosing exercises for our clients in the stabilization level, right? So this is the foundation for everything else. And this is meant to be a very unstable environment that focuses on building stability for our client, right? So the stability ball chest press is a great example. The single leg cable row is a really good example, right? If I show you that one, right? Like single leg cable. Really terrific stabilization level rowing motion. If my client knows, okay, so that's a single leg deadlift 2 cable row. That is also very, very good, but not quite what I was looking for. So you can use a cable machine. He's standing on one leg, right? His other leg is just hovering off the ground there. And that's going to be a really good way to, again, teach your nervous system how to properly learn how to row. So that's the stabilization stuff. Now, the strength stuff is a little bit more traditional. This is the stuff that we're a little bit more used to, right? This is our resistance strength exercises. So how do we progress stuff in the strength level, or what defines the strength level, right? Well, this is going to be built on developing strength. We want to basically just increase force production. How much force can you produce? 100 pounds? Great. Let's make it 105. Let's make it 110. We're just trying to increase the weight that we can lift here and strengthen those actin and myosin proteins, make them a little bit larger sometimes, right? Or give them a little bit more endurance. So there is a large amount of variation between the strength level. Now with youths, we're probably just going to spend our time focusing on strength endurance, which has some specific rules that I'll go over in just a moment. But in the strength level, we are doing our real goal here is right here. We're just increasing our prime mover strength. I'm not focused on those micro muscles anymore. I'm just focused on the big ones and making them much stronger, right? I want my client to be able to, produce more force. That's the goal, right? So these are our stable, heavy resistance type exercises. The bench press, the seated row, the barbell squat, all of those are going to be really good examples. Now, we could talk about the variations here, and we will in just a moment briefly, but the idea of all of the versions of strength is just to lift a little bit heavier. So how do we progress in the strength level? Well, we are going to progress this through increased force production, right? So we are going. So this is going to progress through resistance, right? We are simply making it heavier in order to make it harder, right? We increase the amount of resistance. That's going to make things more challenging. So we might see very similarly here that we are going to choose total body, chest, back, shoulders, biceps, triceps, and legs, but we are choosing strength versions of those things, right? So we are going to see a total body strength exercise. We're going to see chest strength, back strength, shoulder strength, biceps, triceps, and of course, leg strength exercises, right? And that is the sort of types of movements that we are picking here, right? So what makes something a strength movement? Well, it just means that it's performed in a very stable environment. It's kind of what you think of when you think of like strength training. You know, it's that classic, you know, stable environment stuff that we're talking about, where you're just able to make things heavier, right? So if I'm doing, let's say I've got a barbell in my hand, I'm in a very stable environment, which is just 2 feet firmly planted on the ground. I'm going to hinge over at the waist, and I'm going to row straight in with a barbell, right? Pretty simple. How do I make it harder? Throw some more plates on there, you know? I'm 2 legs on the ground. Now, I could obviously try to build up my endurance and do a high number of repetitions. That's great. That's still very much strength, because I'm going to progress it by, you know, once I get to the maximum number of repetitions that I want to do, I'm going to reset and make it harder with heavier weight, right? And that's kind of simple. You know, the strength training stuff is the stuff we're all sort of used to seeing outside of NASM. You know, we're seeing like sort of the standard approach to strength training. You make it harder by making it heavier, you know. Our big thing that we're focusing on here is what we call progressive overload, right? Progressive overload is just making stuff harder as consistently as possible. Now, there are a lot of different versions of progressive overload, right? We know that we have to overload our muscles in order to experience muscle. Wow, that's very small. In order to experience muscle growth, we have to, you know, progress it somehow. If we're going for like size, let's say like we're trying to build mass, well, or we might increase the weight, right? Workout 1, we did 185 pounds for 10 reps, right? Workout 2, we did 190 pounds for 10 reps. We went up by 5 pounds. There we go. There's our progression. Workout 3, 195 pounds for 10 reps. Week 1, week 2, week 3. That's pretty simple to understand, right? Now, we also could increase the number of reps. I could go from 10 reps to 11 reps to 12 reps. That's also an increase in strength, you know. And then I just eventually get to a place where I reset and, you know, go back to like a heavier weight, back down to 10 reps to 11 to 12, right? And that's how I'm going to build up my endurance. Or I could even add sets, right? My first week, I do 3 sets of everything. My second week, I do 4 sets of everything. My third week, I do 5 sets of everything. All of those are versions of progressive overload for strength. Progressive overload for stabilization would be just like we saw earlier. We would go from like a 2-legged situation to a staggered stance to a single leg, right? In stable to unstable environments. So they're just different ways of progressing things depending on what your client's goal is, right? And that is going to be sort of our strength approach. Does that make sense, guys? Any questions on that one? The resistance training stuff? Doesn't seem like it. Everybody's feeling good. All right, lastly, we've got power versions of things. So this requires like good force production and good stability. So you should never jump to this phase directly. You want to make sure that you've built a very good foundation there, right? So it's a stable base of support through stabilization, strong prime movers through strength. Now we are focused on power. Right now, when I say power, I don't just mean the explosive parts of things, right? Like I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who are like, you know, I jump and I jump and I jump, and I'm not progressing on being able to dunk a basketball. Like I'm not getting any closer to the rim. And I keep doing squat jumps. I keep doing like lunge jumps. I'm doing forward jumps. I'm doing, you know, high jumps. So it's like, I don't know why I'm not getting better at being able to like dunk. And it's like, well, they're probably exaggerating a little bit. They probably are getting a little bit better, right? But they've kind of hit like a plateau. And the reason why is because they're actually only working on 1/2 of the equation for power. Like if we look at the two aspects of power is going to come from velocity, which is the jumping, and force production, which is heavy lifting. So if you don't build a foundation of strength first, increase prime mover strength, you are not going to have the ability to increase your velocity, because like you're only getting good at sort of one aspect of that power, right? So power is an equation of force times velocity. And if you're only working on the jumping stuff, you're not really going to increase your power. So we want to make sure that we have sort of a double approach to power here. We want to have strong prime movers before we can do this. It is because the other definition of power is producing the greatest force possible in the shortest amount of time. So the short time is the velocity, the force is going to be force production, right? So we might do a very explosive type movement in order to build this. Now, what's funny is I just said that equation requires like both sides of things, like high force and high velocity, which, Cyrus, one thing we haven't gone over yet is with our adult clients, at least, the way we're going to train for power is we're actually going to train both sides of that equation. We are going to address the force production through like a heavy lift, and then we're going to address the velocity production through like an explosive lift. So I would actually do a superset technique if I'm trying to increase my power. Like, let's say I'm trying to increase like my shoulder power, right? So what I would do is I would do like a really heavy, like barbell, like military press, and I would rack it. And then I would take like a medicine ball and do some really explosive, like shoulder presses. To put those two things together, that's going to give me more explosive shoulders. Or I'll do like a really heavy, like barbell squat, and then I'll rack it and then do some squat jumps. That's going to increase my vert way more effectively, because I'm doing both. I'm shifting both sides of the equation. I'm increasing my strength and I'm increasing my velocity. And when I get both of those things, I'm going to get much more explosive. With youths, we've been talking about this. The heavy lifting, just we can't really capitalize it on we can't really capitalize on it as a youth because we don't have that anaerobic capacity. So we're just going to actually do what is probably not the greatest and only focus on the velocity stuff. We are going to sort of remove the heavy lift and we're going to be left with just the explosive stuff. So when we're looking at our exercise selection here, if we're looking at sort of the red approach, right, this is going to be our power level. So we see level 3 here. Which is going to be power, right? We are going to focus on movements instead of like a bench press. We're going to focus on something like a medicine ball chest pass, right? Instead of a barbell squat, we're going to focus on like a squat jump or a box jump, you know? Instead of a deadlift, maybe we'll do like a kettlebell swing, right? Instead of a military press, we'll do like a push press. It's a really explosive shoulder movement. Instead of a bent over row, now I will say back power exercises are freaking rare and hard to come by, but we might do something like a medicine ball slam, right? Which is like a medicine ball, you slam this way, that's your upper back pulling. Or like a Trx Power Pull is actually my favorite. I'll show you guys that in just a minute. But so there's our you know, level 3 sort of approach to our strength training exercises, right? Oh god, I just did not give myself enough room here. Yeah. Building this box. Get this to all line up just right. So there's the level 3 approach, right? Again, the stability chest press became a bench press, became a chest pass. The squat became the unstable squat became a stable heavy squat, became an explosive squat, right? So there's our sort of progression that we're seeing there, you know, and then that's the thing, like, how do we actually progress this? How do we make it harder in the power level? Well, again, remember, in an adult, we would have two sides of the equation. We could also progress through resistance, or we could progress through velocity. So we'll focus on that. Right, so we are going to increase the velocity in order to make things harder here, right? And by, you know, when we do that, by sort of increasing how fast we are moving a muscle, that's going to shift the velocity curve and make things much more challenging, right? So, you know, this one, there is a slight difference here, but in terms of exercise selection, the NASM approach is going to be total body power exercises, chest power, back power, shoulder power, and then you're going to notice I'm going to go straight to leg power. So that's kind of interesting because you're like, wait, where did biceps and triceps go? But we actually don't do single joint exercises for power. It just doesn't make any sense to really put that effort in because there's a really limited capacity for growth there. So we actually don't have arm exercises in the power. There's no, like if I open the checklist here, if you look in your book on the power checklist, you'll notice if I scroll down, you know, there's all of our power, you know, balance and core power and all that stuff. But it just goes total body, chest, back, shoulders, and then straight into legs. There is no bicep. We don't do single joint power exercises. We only do at least multi-joint or maybe full body or total body joint. So that is sort of how we're seeing the OPT model be laid out, right? This is the peak of everything, right? So we are seeing any exercise that involves like a rapid concentric movement and a rapid eccentric movement through a full range of motion as fast as possible. And it should always start eccentric. I don't know why this is in that order, but we would go like rapid load. So like, you know, fast this way and fast that way. So again, one of my favorite exercises for plyometric power is a TRX Power Pull. This is a really great upper back explosive movement. Oh, level 1, level 2. I'm not sure what that means. Yeah, so he's on one side. Oh, he's going really slow. Got it. This is what we mean when we say. So he's going to go from here and he's going to pull very explosively. And then he's actually going to rapidly eccentrically load him. So the trainer is going to kind of throw him back. That's actually going to rapidly load, and then he's going to rapidly unload. I would say he needs to transition a little faster. We want that transition to be really fast, actually, in order to get that rapid like stretch shorten cycle. But that's really good. Or we could do like what I said, medicine ball slam. That's also a really good upper back exercise, right? So he's here. He's going to rapidly load by throwing the arms overhead, and he's going to unload by slamming down. So he's getting that stretch shortening cycle, right? So yeah, there's a lot of you know, different body parts out there. You'll notice that the list is relatively limited in the textbook for upper back power, just because the problem is like you need to be able to throw something, and you're gonna throw it like into your chest, you know, like so the exercises are somewhat limited. But a medicine ball pullover throw, a soccer throw, a wood chop throw, or speed tubing rows is another really good one. It looks a little goofy, but it is very explosive for your chest. So speed tubing rows look kind of like this. It's a very kind of goofy looking exercise, but you do want to be very explosive, right? So I know it looks silly, but if you are trying to create that explosive upper back, this is actually how you want to do it. You want to just like rip on it really explosively, and you get like a rapid eccentric and rapid concentric, and you want to have a limited pause in between. So it sort of looks like this in the end. And I know that's kind of weird, but that is one of the best ways to build power, right? You can see here's the NASM approach. Oh, that's just regular standing tubing row. So I would put this in the strength level. If she was on one leg, I'd put it in the stabilization level. And then the explosive tubing row here, I would put that in the power level. Again, just variations, right? So there's a difference between like a squat and a, you know, and a single leg squat, right? There's a difference between a box jump and a box jump to stabilization. You know, those are different exercises used for different things. You know, it's like the difference between an elephant and an elephant seal. You know, two different animals sound the same, you know, like, but they are different, right? So that's our OPT model. Now, like I said, for youths, we are primarily going to focus on the stabilization level, strength, endurance, and power. So tomorrow we're going to start getting into phases. But today we just looked at the exercise selection and looked at where we're going to put these things. Phases is where we're going to start to see a difference between like sets, reps, tempo, and like mainly intensity. Our intensity is going to sort of go up as we go up the OPT. But for now, in terms of the levels, how we progress things in the stabilization level, we progress through stability, right? We make it harder by making it more unstable. For the strength level, we progress through resistance, right? We progress it by making it heavier. And for the power level in youths, we're going to progress through velocity. But technically, I guess say, in the power level, we progress through both resistance and velocity. You can make it heavier or more explosive, right? So it doesn't mean you have to use, like, you pick an 8-pound medicine ball and you use that forever and just make it harder and harder, more explosive and more explosive. You can move to a 10-pound medicine ball, right? You can make it heavier, right? But it's sort of it's a combo there, right? So again, we're kind of building on all of our foundations that we sort of, you know, work our way up the staircase. So again, strength training, very beneficial for youths. It improves our gross motor skills. It improves our body composition, bone mineral density, and psychologically has very big benefits, as well as reducing our risk of physical injury. Ideally, what you want to do is maybe 2 to 3 days a week of strength training with adequate rest, 1 to 3 sets, somewhere between 3 and 15 repetitions. 3 if you're doing really explosive movements, 15 if you're probably doing like strength or stability movements. And we're going to progress and regress using the OPT model. So I've got an example routine that I want to show you guys that is going to be in the email, and that's available for download on Canvas. But if you look at your template here, right, this is how we would sort of like, let's just say we're building a total body routine for our client that we're going to progress over like 3 months, right? So here is sort of a stabilization workout that you could do. So we're going to start our client off. We're going to keep it around 15 reps here. And you'll notice I went from like 15 to 16, right? It's like 8 each here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an example of what's called vertical loading. I'll teach you guys vertical loading tomorrow. But like vertical loading is you're going to perform 1 set of each exercise and then move on to the next exercise until you get to the end of the circuit. Then you're going to go back to the top. So you might be like, well, that's just circuit training. The difference is we are actually taking rest between every exercise. Circuit training would be no rest, like boom, 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 right? The other difference is we're also going from upper body to lower body. Circuit training can just be any order that you go in. So vertical loading evenly distributes the blood throughout the body. So we're starting total body, then we go chest, shoulders, chest, back, shoulders, biceps, triceps, and then eventually legs. So we're going in sort of that NASM order of body parts, right? And it's a total body workout. If you were to do this 3 days per week, it would get you pretty darn good results, right? So we're going to start with a step up to balance with curl to press. So this is a total body movement. A little bit of legs, a little bit of biceps, a little bit of shoulders. He goes down. He's going to do 8 each for a total of 16 reps in a controlled tempo. And he's going to take 30 seconds of rest and then work his way over to push-ups, right? So push-ups, nice and slow on the way down, little pause and up. He's not going really slow on the way down. I would say like do like a 4-2-1 tempo here, like 4 seconds on the way down, 2-second pause, 1 second on the way up. 4 seconds on the way down, 2-second pause, 1 second on the way up. That way we're really focused on like developing that stability by going nice and slow. It gives our nervous system time to learn how to do this. Eventually, we'll go into a single leg bent over row. Again, I'm going to have my client do 8 each of these. The focus is the upper body, so they're getting 16, upper back reps. But just to keep the legs nice and even, we'll have them do, a little bit of a single side here. So they're going to go onto one leg. They're going to row, nice and slow on the way down. Pause, nice and slow on the way down, right? There's our upper back exercise. Now we're going to get into our shoulders here. We're going to do one of my all-time favorite shoulder exercises. This is called ball combo number 1. Combo number 1 stands for Y, T, A. So what she's going to do, she's going to go into a Y with her thumbs up towards the ceiling. She's going to go into a T, and she's going to go into an A. So she's getting really good external rotation here. She could do this with plates in her hands, by the way. She could throw like 2.5 pounders or 5 pounders or 10 or whatever in there to make that a little bit more challenging. She could do it with dumbbells, but that's a really good combo. I will often do this on a bench with my clients. If like the ball, like she doesn't have her feet braced on the wall here, which I would recommend. But yeah, that's a good shoulder exercise there. For the biceps, we're gonna do a single leg hammer curl. So just standing on one leg, curling up and bringing it back down, right? Pretty basic stuff. For the triceps, we're gonna do a stability ball tricep like skull crusher. So she's doing a really great job. She's got level hips here. That ball's a little small for her, but not bad, right? And she's going back, she's really strengthening that tricep. So there's our unstable tricep example. And then lastly, a single leg squat with touchdown, which is going to be a really good, like I said, it's kind of a hinging movement more than it is like an actual squatting movement. But there's that unstable leg exercise. My client does that. They get to the very end of the circuit. They take 90 seconds of rest. They go back to the top and they're going to do 3 rounds of all of that. So that's our first month. If I did that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that's a pretty good routine. I think it's a little simple. It's a little boring. I would probably have like an A-B thing. But I love this like total body approach that we've got here. They would end up doing that workout like 12 times before the month is over. I like that, but like I said, it's a little boring. So I'd probably get some variety in there. I'd probably build like 2, maybe even 3 of these and have them do like, just swap out these exercises, but keep the same rep and rest and tempo and set scheme, and just have like a mirror version of that. Instead of a step up to balance curl to press, I'd probably do like a static lunge curl to press, right? Or a lunge to balance curl to press, so then let's say my client gets really great at this. They've increased their stability. I trust them in the push, the pull, the squat, the hinge, the row. I trust them in all 5 movements. They're really good, right? And now I want to move into a strength level. So one rule that I didn't really talk too much about today, and Cyrus, this will be the first time you've heard this. So strength endurance, I told you it's kind of like phase 1.5, right? Like it's phase 2 for sure, and it belongs within the strength level. But I kind of consider it to be phase 1.5 because you're not fully committing to strength here. You're sort of easing your way out. And so what we're going to do to build endurance is we're going to do superset techniques. So we're going to do 2 exercises back to back with little to no rest in between, exercise 1 and exercise 2. And I'm going to do it for the same body part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a high force, high resistance exercise first, like a strength movement, right? So in this case, I'm going to do a floor dumbbell chest press rather than a stability ball chest press, right? So there's the floor press. This is a very stable chest press exercise. I could also do a bench chest press if I wanted to, right? But we're going to go from there. And my client's going to do 8 reps of that. And then they're going to do 8 reps. They're going to immediately flip over and they're going to go right back to the push-up, which we did in month 1. So they're doing a stabilization level exercise right afterwards. So they do strength first, stabilization second. Now that might seem a little odd, but the purpose of that is to build the endurance, right? They're going to really build their endurance because they end up doing they're not doing 8 reps, they're doing 16 reps, right? Then I might do the bent over row with like a barbell, or in this case, I guess dumbbells. And I'm going to pair that with last month's single leg bent over row. So they go from light to heavy, right? And when they get down there, again, they're lifting a little bit lighter, but they're building their endurance because they don't get to rest, right? I'm going to do a heavy scaption, right? Dumbbell scaption here, which is going to be for the shoulders, right? It's like or I could do a heavy lateral raise. And then I'm going to pair that up with last month's ball combo number 1. Again, no rest weeks. Look over here. It says 8 reps of the first. You do a medium tempo. You lift really heavy. 0 seconds of rest immediately into that second exercise. And then instead of just the single leg squat touchdown, I'm going to do a deadlift. Deadlift right into single leg squat touchdown. And that is the strength endurance approach. This, when it comes to strength training for our youths, this is probably the only type of strength we're going to focus on until they're like a late stage teen. Then maybe we can get into a little bit of hypertrophy training where we would just remove all of this stabilization stuff. And there you go. There's a hypertrophy routine, 3 sets of 8, probably 4 sets of 8, medium tempo, lifting nice and heavy with 60 seconds of rest instead of obviously 0. So that's our total body strength endurance routine. Again, I could just do that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm hitting the full body. Or likely what I would do is I'd build 3 of those, workout A, workout B, workout C, and I would just plug in different exercises, right? To keep it, kind of fun and unique there. And then lastly, we've got the power approach here, right? So power, we're going to do like a total body power exercise, something like a burpee, right? So we go down, we go up, that's total body power, right? And then I might do like a plyo push-up. That's going to be a very explosive chest power exercise. Or I could do a medicine ball chest pass, right? Anything that's going to be really explosive for my chest here. Give me the demo, lady. So there we go, right? She's doing a clap push-up, right? Or I might do a medicine ball slam for my upper back. I know it kind of looks like leggy a little bit, but then we got the push press. Here's my explosive shoulder exercise. So she gives a little dip in the knees, use the legs to kind of help her explosively press that up. And then instead of just a squat jumps, right? Very explosive in the plyometrics there. So that is the total body power routine. So I've got a 3-month progression for my client here. And if I put this together with all the movement prep and all the warm-up stuff that I had, that's what we're going to see tomorrow. We'll have a very good sort of progression for my client. My client's not likely to plateau. I'm progressing them specifically, and they are sort of improving in all levels of athleticism. And that's honestly, the approach to resistance training. Does that make sense, everybody? Do you guys have any questions? Chris, Julio, Cyrus, you guys all feeling good? Oh, you guys still with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. All righty. Well, that is about all I got for you. We can go ahead and kill the recording.